The focus of this video is a little known but significant Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, policy called Visual Resource Management, VRM. This semi-quantitative system, whose metrics can be strongly tied to 19th century formalism in art, is used by the BLM to determine the scenic or visual values of America's public lands. Borrowing its language and criteria directly from art criticism and pedagogy, the Visual Resource Management System primarily determines landscape characteristics based on the basic visual elements of form, line, color, texture, variety, and harmony, thus assessing the landscape the same way a traditional painter or photographer might. The BLM requires that visual resource considerations be included in all environmental assessments, in all land use planning decisions, and in the implication of all resource projects. The system provides guidance not only for the identification and management of visually valuable landscapes, but also strategies for exploiting areas of natural beauty without disturbing their visual characteristics, thus maintaining the public perception of an intact natural ecosystem while still allowing for industrial resource extraction. This video explores the VRM system in a unique example of how the formalist aesthetics that guided European and American attitudes about both art and nature in the 18th and 19th century remain deeply embedded in Western conceptions of nature, and how this image of nature continues to be used in late capitalism to maximize profits from ecologically harmful resource extraction while largely avoiding public dissent. The BLM's Visual Resource Management (VRM) system is an analytical process that identifies, sets, and meets objectives for maintaining scenic values and visual quality. The system is based on research that has produced ways of assessing aesthetic qualities of the landscape in objective, universally recognizable terms. What had been considered extremely subjective, aesthetic judgment, particularly in the landscape, was found to have identifiable, consistent qualities which can be described and measured, and about which people with diverse opinions will tend to agree. Whatever the terrain, and whoever the observer, perception of visual quality in a landscape seems to be based on several common principles. Landscape character is, for the most part, determined by the four basic visual elements of form, line, color, texture. Although all four elements are present in every landscape, they exert varying degrees of influence. The stronger the influences exerted by these elements, the more interesting the landscape. The more visual variety in a landscape, the more aesthetically pleasing that landscape. Variety without harmony, however, is unattractive, particularly in terms of man-made alterations, cultural modifications that are made without care. The BLM incorporates these and other principles in a broad program for managing visual resources. To understand how the Bureau of Land Management manages visual resources, it is important to understand how some key terms are used in the VRM system. Many of the terms illustrated and briefly defined here are drawn directly from the visual arts. Others have been modified somewhat, given special meanings by their VRM context. All are basic, the program language of VRM. 1. Form, the mass or shape of an object, which appears unified, often defined by edge, outline, and surrounding space. 2. Line, the path that the eye follows when perceiving abrupt differences in form, color, or texture. In the landscape, ridges, skylines, structures, changes in vegetation, or individual trees and branches may be perceived as line. 3. Color, the property of reflecting light in a particular wavelength that enables the eye to differentiate otherwise indistinguishable objects. 4. Texture, the visual manifestation of the interplay of light and shadow created by variations in the surface of an object. 5. Harmony, the combination of parts into a pleasing or orderly whole. 6. Variety, the condition of having differentiated parts, the absence of monotony or sameness. 7. Contrast, the effect of a striking difference in form, line, color, or texture of a landscape's features. 8. Cultural modification, any man-made change in land, water form, or vegetation, roads, bridges, buildings, fences, the addition of a structure which creates a visual contrast to the natural character of a landscape. A negative cultural modification is disharmonious with the existing scenery. A positive cultural modification can actually complement and improve a particular scene by adding variety and harmony. 9. Backlighting, the light source comes from behind the object viewed. The visible face of the object is generally in shadow and its edge highlighted. 10. Front lighting, the light source comes from behind the observer and falls directly on the object viewed. There is little shadow effect. 11. Side lighting, the light source comes from one side of the object viewed. This is the light considered most effective for evaluating visual contrast. Inventory evaluation. The inventory evaluation process in the VRM consists of 3 steps: assessment of the visual quality of the landscape, the sensitivity of people to changes in the landscape, and the viewing distance. Although the details of the evaluation are intricate, the process itself is straightforward. Scenic quality. Scenic quality is perhaps best described as the overall impression retained after driving through, walking through, or flying over an area of land. In the VRM process, rating scenic quality requires a brief description of the existing scenic values in a landscape. This step identifies areas that must be protected, opportunities for enhancement and rehabilitation, and opportunities for improvement by reducing the contrast of cultural modifications. When inventoried, an area is first divided into subunits that appear homogeneous, generally in terms of landform and vegetation. Each area is then rated by 7 key factors: landform, vegetation, water, color, influence of adjacent scenery, scarcity, and cultural modification. A standardized point system assigns great, some, or little importance to each factor. The values for each category are calculated and, according to the total points, 3 scenic quality classes are determined and mapped. Class A, areas that combine the most outstanding characteristics of each rating factor, 19 to 33 points. Class B, areas in which there is a combination of some outstanding features and some that are fairly common to the physiographic region, 12 to 18 points. Class C, areas in which the features are fairly common to the physiographic region, 0 to 77 points. Sensitivity levels. Although landscapes do have common elements that can be measured, there is still a subjective dimension to landscape aesthetics every viewer brings to the landscape perceptions formed by individual influences: culture, visual training, familiarity with local geography, and personal values. To measure regional and individual attitudes for inclusion in the evaluation of a landscape, visual sensitivity is determined in two ways. Use volume. Travel through an area and the use of that area are tabulated and then assigned a high, medium, low rating according to predetermined classifications. User or public attitudes. Public groups are invited to workshops where they are familiarized with the landscape area and then asked to respond to activities that will modify that landscape. The concern they express about proposed changes in scenic quality is rated as high, medium, or low. A matrix then combines use volume and user attitudes in an overall visual sensitivity rating of high, medium, or low. Distance zones. The scenic quality of a landscape, user attitudes, and therefore the modifications acceptable or desirable, may be magnified or diminished by the visibility of the landscape from major viewing routes and key points. In the VRM system, a landscape scene may be divided into three basic distance zones: foreground, middle ground. What is visible to an observer at a distance of 3 to 5 miles? At the outer boundary of this zone, the texture and form of an individual plant are no longer seen. Background. What is visible to an observer at a distance of 5 to 15 miles, excluding objects perceived only by form or outline. Vegetation included in this zone should be visible at least as patterns of light and dark. Seldom seen. What is visible to an observer beyond a distance of 15 miles or is obscured from view at a closer range. Management classes. Visual resource management classes describe the different degrees of modification allowed in the basic elements of the landscape. In practice, the management class designation is derived from an overlay matrix evaluation technique that identifies areas with similar combinations of factors, and then assigns them to a VRM class according to predetermined criteria. The resulting map of contiguous areas sharing the same VRM class is an important planning document for all BLM land use decisions. It is used in the BLM's multiple use planning process, then becomes the basis for developing visual resource management objectives. and is also used to assess the visual impact of proposed development activities. Class 1. This class provides primarily for natural ecological changes. However, it does not preclude very limited management activity. Any contrast created within the characteristic environment must not attract attention. It is applied to wilderness areas, some natural areas, wild portions of the wild and scenic rivers, and other similar situations where management activities are to be restricted. Class 2. Changes in any of the basic elements, form, line, color, texture, caused by a management activity should not be evident in the characteristic landscape. A contrast may be seen but should not attract attention. Class 3. Contrasts to the basic elements, form, line, color, texture, caused by a management activity may be evident and begin to attract attention in the characteristic landscape. However, the changes should remain subordinate to the existing characteristic landscape. Class 4. Contrasts may attract attention and be a dominant feature of the landscape in terms of scale. However, the change should repeat the basic elements, form, line, color, texture, inherent in the characteristic landscape. Class 5. The classification is applied to areas where the natural character of the landscape has been disturbed to a point where rehabilitation is needed to bring it up to one of the 4 other classifications. The classification also applies to areas where there is potential to increase the landscape's visual quality. It would, for example, be applied to areas where unacceptable cultural modification has lowered scenic quality. It is often used as an interim classification until objectives of another class can be reached. Contrast rating system. A measure of the ease with which a proposed activity can be inserted into a landscape is the contrast of that activity with the basic elements of the landscape. Assessing the contrast of a proposed project against the form, line, color, and texture of the existing setting is a simple but effective demonstration of the modifications that may be required to meet a desired landscape quality. To accomplish this, the BLM contrast rating procedure is applied to all proposed development and management activities. This procedure first breaks a landscape down into its major features: land and water, vegetation, structures, and each feature in turn into its basic elements: form, line, color, texture. Assessing the predicted contrast of a proposed activity against each feature in the landscape readily indicates the anticipated severity of visual impact. In the contrast rating system, the ease of detecting contrast in the basic elements ranges from the highest rated, form, to the lowest rated, texture. By assessing degrees of contrast in each of the major features, a multiplier can be derived that indicates intensity of contrast. The VRM program initiates the inventory and evaluation of visual resources on all land under the BLM jurisdiction. Once inventoried and analysed, these lands are given relative scenic value ratings. Action plans are then developed for improving or preserving the scenic values of each parcel. The VRM program also functions on a support level, through the development of graphic simulation techniques to model visual impacts, through monitoring actual visual impacts of new development activities, and through the publication of technical reports, such as this video, that disseminate current information on the program. Poorly designed activities reflect negatively on BLM's image and may result in undesirable consequences to local economies, quality of life, and visitor experiences.